It was a Tuesday morning when I found a turtle in my garage, paddling through 6 inches of murky water that had seeped in overnight. Not a pet, not a prank, a real, cranky turtle, glaring at me like I'd stolen its lunch. I stood there, boots soaked, holding a soggy newspaper and a cup of coffee gone cold, wondering how my quiet life in Meadowview Estates, a tidy suburb outside Raleigh, North Carolina, had turned into a scene from a swamp documentary. This wasn't just bad luck. This was the fault of Linda Grayson, the HOA president, and her obsession with a community lake that had drowned my backyard, ruined my shed, and turned my rose garden into a mosquito haven. The HOA called it an act of nature. I called it negligence. And I was about to give them a lesson in gravity they'd never forget. 3 months earlier, life in Meadowview was calm. My ranch-style home sat on a half-acre lot, with a backyard I'd spent years perfecting, neat flower beds, a small patio, and a shed where I tinkered with woodworking projects. The peace was shattered when Linda, a woman with the charm of a tax auditor and the stubbornness of a mule, unveiled her Legacy Lake project at the HOA's quarterly meeting. She waved a glossy brochure, tossing around phrases like sustainable elegance and aesthetic tranquility. Her vision, a shimmering lake behind the community center, complete with a fountain and benches for reflection. The board, a clique of her loyalists, nodded like bobbleheads. I raised my hand and asked one question: what about drainage? Linda froze, then brushed me off with a smirk. We've consulted experts, Tom. It's all under control. I later learned her experts were her nephew, Carl, and a landscaping crew with a 1-star Google rating and a history of shoddy work. Construction started days later. Bulldozers tore up the community green, carving a massive pit that looked more like a quarry than a lake. They lined it with budget gravel, installed a plastic fountain, and declared it done. Trouble began with the first spring rain. The lake overflowed, and the runoff didn't spread evenly. It surged straight into my yard. Puddles turned into streams, then a full-blown marsh. My shed floor was underwater, my roses wilted, and my patio furniture floated like driftwood. I stormed to the HOA office, where Linda was sipping tea, scrolling through her phone. I explained the damage. She sighed, barely looking up. Water flows downhill, Tom. Your lot's the lowest point. Maybe get a sump pump. Her tone was pure condescension, like I was whining about a leaky faucet. I tried the city next, filing complaints with the planning department and storm management office. They shrugged, saying private HOA projects were outside their jurisdiction. Sort it out with your board, they said. Easier said than done when the board was Linda's personal fan club. At the next HOA meeting, I wasn't alone. Other neighbors reported soggy lawns and flooded basements. Linda deflected with a PowerPoint of herons and lily pads, claiming the lake was a wildlife haven. When I pressed her on the drainage, she banged her gavel and accused me of disrupting harmony. Harmony? I was wearing waders in my own kitchen. Frustration turned to fury one rainy night as I bailed out my shed for the 5th time. Standing in the downpour, I traced the water's path across my lawn, past a clogged culvert, to a suspiciously placed pipe near the HOA's fence. It wasn't a natural runoff, it was angled directly at my property. I dug around it, finding fresh PVC buried under thin sod. This wasn't an accident. Linda had chosen my yard as her dumping ground. That realization flipped a switch in me. I wasn't just Tom Harper, the retired engineer who liked his roses and quiet evenings. I was a man with a plan. I went silent, no more complaints or meetings. Instead, I got to work. I pulled the neighborhood's topographic map, calculated slopes, and measured the lake's overflow rate. Linda was planning a grand summer barbecue by the community pool to celebrate her legacy. I was planning something else, a redirect that would turn her sparkling pool into a mirror of her precious lake. If she thought my yard was fair game, I'd show her what fair really meant. The smell hit first, a sour, rotting stench wafting through Meadowview by mid-May. My backyard was a bog, buzzing with flies, the grass long dead. Neighbors started noticing too. Ellen from 2 streets over complained about her azaleas drowning. A dad down the block found his kid's sandbox filled with green sludge. The HOA's response. Linda posted flyers about embracing nature's cycles. I stopped arguing and started investigating. I installed a water sensor in my yard, logging every surge after a rain. I flew a drone, capturing footage of the lake's overflow path. The pipe wasn't a fluke, it was a custom job, funded by HOA dues, installed by Carl's crew. I found the invoice buried in the HOA's budget, labeled Water Retention Enhancement. Shady didn't begin to cover it. I called an old colleague, Rachel, a stormwater consultant for the state. She toured my yard, shook her head, and said, "They engineered this to hit you." She pointed out the pipe's precise angle and the lake's lack of proper spillways. "One good storm," she warned, "and it's a disaster." The forecast promised just theta deluge rolling in from the coast. Meanwhile, Linda was hyping her barbecue, with catered ribs, a DJ, and poolside cocktails. I studied the community pool's blueprint, noting its drainage lines and a slight incline from the lake. With a small tweak, I could send the lake's overflow straight to her party. Rachel lent me a trenching tool, and under cover of night, I dug a shallow channel along the HOA's hedge, hidden by mulch. I rigged a manual valve to control the flow, ensuring the water would bypass my yard and flood the pool's drains. It was precise, temporary, and perfectly deniable. The storm hit on Friday night, a roaring downpour that shook the windows. Linda sent a smug HOA email, claiming her lake could handle anything. At 1 a.m., I slipped outside, turned the valve, and watched the water roar through my trench, bypassing my yard and racing toward the pool. I went back to bed, slept like a baby, and woke to chaos. By dawn, the pool was a murky soup of algae, leaves, and what looked like a fish or two. Ellen, setting up tables for the barbecue, screamed loud enough to wake the dead. I sipped coffee, watching from my porch as my hidden camera recorded the scene. Linda arrived in a sundress and a straw hat, her smile vanishing as she saw her pool now a twin to her lake. The stench was unbearable, and inflatable pool floats bobbed in the muck like survivors of a shipwreck. Neighbors gathered, whispering, some laughing. Linda tried to spin it, blaming unprecedented rainfall. Then Ellen showed a video I'd anonymously share, the one where I'd poured red food dye into the lake, proving it flowed straight to my yard. The footage, complete with timestamps and drone shots of the buried pipe, went viral in the neighborhood chat. Linda's face turned ashen. She accused me of sabotage, shouting about lawsuits. I strolled over, calm as a summer breeze, and handed her a binder. Photos, sensor logs, Rachel's report, and the damning HOA invoice with her signature. "You flooded my yard first," I said. "I just gave the water a better path." The crowd murmured, some cheering. I'd also sent copies to the city, the HOA's insurer, and a local blogger with a knack for exposing scandals. Linda's bravado crumbled. She flipped through the binder, speechless, as the DJ canceled and the caterer sped off. The city responded by noon. A health inspector declared the pool a hazard, taping it off with warning signs. The barbecue was scrapped, and the lake faced scrutiny. Within days, the city launched a probe into the HOA's finances, uncovering years of misused funds, Linda's pet projects, Carl's overpriced contracts, even a new deck for her own house. She resigned by Monday, citing health concerns, but the neighborhood knew better. Her nephew's company lost its license, and the lake was filled in, replaced with native plants that actually drained properly. The fallout was seismic. Neighbors, once silent, demanded reform. A new president, George Ramsey, a retired civil engineer, took over, promising transparency. Meetings went online, budgets were public, and shady deals were history. My yard dried out, my shed was rebuilt, and my roses bloomed again. The pool was drained, scrubbed, and reopened, with a small plaque by the deca-polished pipe fragment I'd salvaged, engraved with "Follow the Flow." It was part joke, part warning, and all truth. Linda's house hit the market, unsold for months, her name a punchline in local forums. A month later, an unmarked envelope arrived at my door. Inside was a photo of her overgrown yard, a cracked fountain in the corner, and a note. "I understand now." I filed it away and moved on. The neighborhood healed. Kids played on the new green, and the HOA worked for us, not against us. One evening, at a community potluck, George raised a toast to "those who speak up." He looked at me. I nodded, feeling the weight of a fight well won. The rain came again, a gentle spring shower. I sat on my porch, watching it slide through the new gutters, my yard dry and alive. The turtle never returned, but the lesson did. Water doesn't care about power or pride, it goes where the land allows. Linda tried to bend it to her will and paid the price. Me? I just gave it a nudge and let nature do the rest. What do you think? Was I right to fight back, or did I go too far? Share your thoughts in the comments, especially about standing up to injustice or dealing with bullies in your own life. Let's hear your perspective.